The galaxy was wide and endless, filled with stars, planets, and countless species who all thought they understood war. They had fought among themselves for centuries, trading victories and defeats across the void of space. Yet in their minds, humanity was still a young race. They believed humans were reckless explorers who had risen too quickly, reaching the stars before they truly understood the dangers of the galaxy. To most alien leaders, humanity was seen as bold but fragile, daring but unprepared. They spoke of humans as though they were children playing with fire. But that belief was about to change. In the Orion sector, a lonely human warship patrolled near the border. It was called the HSS Liberty, a vessel not very large compared to the fleets of the Alien Alliance, but built with human determination and new ideas. Inside the ship, Captain Daniel Harris stood on the command deck. He was a man in his 40s, calm, steady, and respected by his crew. He had lived through battles before and carried himself with quiet strength. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Claire Morgan, was by his side. She was sharp, quick to make decisions, and deeply loyal to both her captain and her people. On the lower deck, Ensign Jason Carter, the youngest on board, tried to hide his nerves as he studied the tactical maps. This was his first real mission beyond training, and though he wanted to prove himself, his heart raced every time the alarms hummed with a warning. Far away, the alien fleet gathered. Ships belonging to the Vral, the Torgans, and the Lithari formed a coalition led by General Krax of the Vral. He was tall and brutal, his voice a growl that inspired both fear and loyalty among his kind. The coalition had grown tired of humanity's expansion into sectors they claimed as their own. To them, the Liberty was nothing more than prey, a lonely ship wandering into their trap. Krax's ships were larger, their weapons heavier, their crews trained in centuries of interstellar conflict. They saw this human warship as an easy way to send a message. Humanity was weak, and if they dared to cross the line, they would be destroyed. On the Liberty, the crew had no illusions about the dangers. Captain Harris had studied the patterns of alien fleets for years. He knew something was coming, though he did not yet know the scale of it. Standing before the wide view of the stars, he folded his hands behind his back. "Stay sharp," he said calmly, his voice carrying through the deck. "The quiet in space often hides what's about to come." Claire nodded, her eyes locked on the readings. Jason sat at his console, whispering the details of the data to himself so he would not make mistakes. The Liberty was not built like other ships. It was smaller, but every inch of it had been designed with care. Rail cannons sat ready along its sides, weapons that fired with speed and power unlike anything the older alien empires had seen. Drones waited in launch bays, each one prepared to fly into battle not just with firepower but with the ability to hack into enemy systems. The ship's hull had been reinforced with alloys that could absorb blasts that should have torn it apart. Most importantly, the Liberty was guided by a crew that trusted each other fully. Harris did not lead by fear but by respect. He listened to his officers, gave orders with precision, and inspired confidence in even the most nervous recruits. Outside, the alien fleet closed in. General Krax stood aboard his flagship, the Vral Dominator, and gave the order to attack. He expected fear, panic, and retreat. Instead, the Liberty held its course. On the human ship, Jason felt his stomach tighten when the alarms blared louder, warning of incoming hostiles. Claire placed a steady hand on the console as she gave instructions to her team. Maintain formation, shields to full, weapons online. Her voice was strong, steady, and carried no sign of fear. Jason swallowed hard, his fingers moving across controls as he activated systems. Harris remained silent for a long moment, then said only, "Let them come." The first shots lit up the darkness. Bright plasma beams cut across the stars, striking the Liberty's shields. The ship shook, and Jason nearly lost his balance. Sparks flew from a nearby console, but the shields held. Claire reported calmly, "Shields at 80%. Holding steady." Harris nodded, his eyes never leaving the tactical display. The aliens cheered aboard their own ships, certain they had already begun to break their prey. But in that moment, inside the Liberty, something very different was happening. The crew was not breaking. They were bracing. Jason looked at the captain, surprised at how calm he was. Harris spoke again, his tone even, almost quiet, but filled with certainty. "They think we are weak. They think they have already won. They are wrong. Prepare to answer." Every crew member straightened. Hands moved faster. Voices became sharper, and the Liberty seemed to breathe as one. The warship had taken its first hit, and now it was ready to respond. In that instant, a new chapter of galactic history was being written, though no one yet understood how deeply it would change everything. The stars that had watched countless wars before were about to witness something new, the moment the galaxy stopped underestimating humanity. The first strike from the alien fleet had hit the Liberty with blinding force, yet the warship remained steady in the void. On board, the crew felt the tremor of impact through the floors and walls, but their training kept them at their posts. Captain Daniel Harris stayed calm as ever, standing tall on the command deck with his arms folded behind his back. His sharp eyes watched the tactical screens while alarms rang across the ship. Lieutenant Claire Morgan moved quickly at her station, calling out shield percentages, weapon status, and enemy positions with clear precision. She did not let her voice shake, and her calmness spread across the deck like a shield stronger than metal. Ensign Jason Carter, still the youngest and most nervous among them, forced his trembling fingers to respond correctly to every command, checking systems and relaying information as fast as he could. The alien fleet pressed harder. Plasma beams streaked again, striking against the Liberty's defenses. The ship shook under the force. Lights flickered and sparks jumped from overloaded circuits. But the armor held. The aliens were confused. They had fought against other empires and knew how their weapons tore through shields and hulls. Yet the human warship resisted them longer than expected. General Krax on board his massive flagship growled in frustration. His yellow eyes glowed as he ordered more ships to attack, determined to end this battle quickly. He wanted the human ship destroyed in minutes, a trophy to prove to the galaxy that humans were nothing but weak pretenders. Inside the Liberty, Captain Harris finally gave the command they had all been waiting for. His calm voice carried across the deck. Return fire. Claire's hands moved across the console, and the Liberty's rail cannons roared to life. Bright streaks of metal slugs tore through the emptiness of space faster than the eye could follow. They smashed into the shields of the nearest alien cruiser, punching holes where no alien weapon had ever pierced before. In seconds, the cruiser's systems faltered, its engine sputtered, and then an explosion tore across its hull. Jason's eyes widened as he saw the display flash red, marking the first alien ship destroyed. He whispered under his breath, almost in disbelief, "We hit them. We actually hit them." But there was no time to celebrate. The alien fleet responded with a hail of fire, each ship releasing energy beams and torpedoes into the black. The Liberty twisted and turned, guided by the skilled hands of its pilot and the calm instructions of Claire. The crew worked together like one body. Every time Jason thought the ship might not survive the next strike, it pulled through, dodging or absorbing the attacks with its reinforced hull. Then came the drones. Harris gave the order, and the bays opened along the Liberty's sides. Sleek, dark machines launched into the void, small but deadly. They flew like shadows between the alien cruisers, weaving and darting faster than enemy gunners could track. Each drone carried weapons and something more dangerous, programs designed to hack enemy systems. They latched onto hulls, slipped through shield gaps, and spread chaos inside alien ships. Engines shut down, weapons turned silent, and crews screamed in confusion as their own technology betrayed them. Jason tracked the drones on his console, his hands moving quickly as he relayed positions and status reports. He had never seen anything like it. 2 enemy cruisers disabled, he called out, his voice steadier now. Another one losing power. On the alien flagship, General Krax roared in anger. He slammed his clawed fist against the arm of his chair, denting the metal. Useless, he shouted at his officers. Crush them. Do not let a single human live. His pride was burning, and his fury blinded him to the reality that his fleet was unraveling. Ships that had once stood in perfect formation were now breaking apart, scattered by the Liberty's counterattack. Back on the Liberty, Claire's voice rang out. Portside shields at 60%. Starboard holding strong. Drones reporting full effectiveness. Harris gave her a small nod, his expression unreadable but steady. He turned toward Jason. Keep feeding data to the drones. Every second counts. Jason straightened in his seat and answered with a quick, "Yes, sir." For the first time since the battle began, he felt like he truly belonged there, part of something greater. Another alien ship exploded, its fiery wreckage spinning into the darkness. The crew of the Liberty didn't cheer. They stayed focused. The battle was far from over. But a strange feeling began to rise inside them. Hope. They realized they were not only surviving, but they were pushing back. General Krax ordered his fleet to regroup. Alien ships pulled into tighter formations, attempting to cover one another. But Harris and Claire read their movements with cold precision. Harris gave orders to shift fire, targeting weak points in the new formation. Claire coordinated with the drones, directing them like a conductor guiding an orchestra. The Liberty struck again, its weapons precise and devastating. A second wave of alien cruisers fell apart, breaking under the human warship's relentless fire. Jason stared at the tactical display, his mind racing. He remembered the words of his instructors back at the academy, who had spoken about human adaptability. They said humanity's greatest strength was not size or numbers, but the ability to think differently, to use creativity when others relied only on tradition. Watching the Liberty fight, Jason realized those words were true. The aliens had centuries of experience, but humans had imagination, and that was proving far deadlier than the enemy had ever expected. As the minutes passed, the space around the Liberty became a storm of fire and wreckage. Alien voices shouted across their comms, panicked and desperate. Harris listened in silence, his expression never changing. He knew this battle would not only decide the fate of his ship, but would echo across the galaxy. If they won here, if they survived this day, humanity would never again be underestimated. The alien fleet tried one final tactic. General Krax ordered all his remaining ships to focus fire on the Liberty, no matter the cost. Plasma beams, torpedoes, and energy bursts came all at once. A storm meant to overwhelm even the strongest defenses. The Liberty groaned under the pressure. Alarms screamed, and Jason's console flashed with warnings. "Shields dropping fast," he shouted. Claire responded instantly, rerouting power, adjusting angles, and shouting orders to engineering. Sparks fell from the ceiling as systems strained to their limits. Captain Harris finally broke his silence with a single command. Now! The Liberty unleashed its full power. Rail cannons fired in rapid succession, their glowing trails lighting the void like falling stars. Drones struck deep into the enemy formation, tearing through ships from the inside. A pulse wave burst from the Liberty's core, disrupting alien targeting systems and scattering their last attack. In seconds, the tide turned again. Alien ships burned, their formations collapsing into chaos. On the alien flagship, General Krax watched in horror as his proud fleet fell apart. The Dominator shook as human drones clawed at its systems. His officers looked at him with fear, but he refused to retreat. "Fight!" he roared, though his voice was drowned out by the sound of explosions across his own ship. On the Liberty, Jason exhaled a long breath he didn't realize he had been holding. "They're breaking," he said quietly. Claire nodded, her voice calm but firm. "Keep the pressure. Do not give them a chance to recover." Harris gave no outward sign of victory, only a quiet command. "Finish it." The battle was far from decided, but in those moments, the truth became clear. The aliens had attacked a human warship, expecting fear and weakness. Instead, they had awakened something else entirely. In seconds that felt like eternity, the galaxy's view of humanity began to change forever. The void outside the Liberty burned with the remains of alien cruisers, their wreckage scattering across the stars like broken glass. The human warship floated among it, scarred but still steady, its crew alive and focused. On the command deck, Captain Daniel Harris studied the tactical screens with the same calmness he had shown since the battle began. Lieutenant Claire Morgan worked quickly, giving orders with sharp precision, while Ensign Jason Carter struggled to keep up with the flood of data racing across his console. Every second mattered, and every mistake could be the difference between survival and destruction. The alien fleet was in chaos. General Krax had lost more ships than he could count, yet he refused to back down. His pride demanded victory, even as his officers begged him to retreat. He snarled at them, his glowing eyes filled with rage. "Humans are fragile. They cannot stand against us. Push forward." His voice shook the walls of his command chamber, but deep inside, fear was beginning to grow. The humans had proven far stronger than he had expected, and now each moment seemed to pull his fleet further into disaster. Inside the Liberty, Jason felt the pressure mounting. His fingers tapped across the controls, calling out readings as fast as his voice could carry them. "Drones still active on 6 targets. Enemy engines shutting down. Weapons malfunctions detected across multiple cruisers. His heart raced, but there was no time to let fear take over. Claire responded calmly, directing the drones into tighter formations and focusing their attacks on weak spots. Keep pressing them. Do not let them regroup. Harris stood silent for a long moment before speaking. Shift our main fire to the central line. Break their spine. His tone was quiet but sharp, each word carrying weight. Claire repeated the order, and the Liberty's rail cannons roared again. Blazing slugs cut through the void and slammed into alien ships. Another explosion filled the darkness, the debris spreading across the battlefield. The aliens faltered once more, but General Krax was not finished. He ordered his remaining ships into a desperate charge, throwing everything he had left at the Liberty. Plasma beams lit the darkness in blinding streaks, torpedoes hurled through the void, and smaller fighter craft swarmed toward the human ship. The Liberty shuddered under the assault. Shields flickered dangerously. Warning lights flashed across Jason's console and systems strained to their limits. Jason shouted, "Shields at 30%. Hull integrity dropping." Sparks rained down from overhead wires as the ship groaned. Claire worked fast, her hands moving in a blur as she redirected power and stabilized systems. "Engineering, reroute everything to shields. Weapons, hold fire until I give the signal." She remained calm, her voice steady even as the deck shook beneath them. Harris waited, watching the tactical display with unwavering focus. He knew this moment mattered more than anything. If the Liberty faltered now, the battle would end in disaster. If they held, they could break the enemy once and for all. At last he gave his order. Release the counterstrike. The Liberty erupted with fury. Rail cannons fired in rapid succession. Drones swarmed like a storm of steel, and pulse weapons burst in wide arcs that ripped through alien fighters. Jason watched the screen as one enemy ship after another lit up red, their systems collapsing. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. 3 more down. Another disabled. They're falling apart. On the alien flagship, Krax roared with rage. His fleet was breaking, his ships scattering, and his once proud coalition collapsing into ruin. His officers pleaded with him to retreat, their voices trembling with fear. But Krax refused. He slammed his fist into the command console, cracking the surface. "I will not run from humans. Fight until the last breath." Yet his words no longer inspired strength. They only deepened the despair of those who served him. Back on the Liberty, the crew pushed harder. Claire coordinated with the drones, guiding them like hunters through the chaos. Jason tracked every move, his hands flying faster than ever before. For the first time, his nerves faded. He no longer felt like a rookie. He felt like part of the team. He called out targets, rerouted power, and managed systems with growing confidence. Claire noticed and gave him a small nod of approval even in the heat of battle. That nod gave Jason the strength to keep going. The Liberty's weapons hit with terrifying precision. Alien ships tried to regroup, but each time they formed a line, it was broken apart by human firepower. The battlefield that had once been filled with overwhelming alien strength now looked like a graveyard of broken ships. The stars themselves seemed to shine brighter as the flames of destruction flickered out. Still, the fight was not over. General Krax gathered his remaining ships and attempted one final strike. They formed around his flagship, creating a wall of steel and fire. He poured every ounce of fury into the attack, determined to take the Liberty with him even if it cost him everything. Plasma beams slammed into the human warship, shaking it to its core. Jason shouted warnings as systems failed one by one. "Weapons offline! Shields collapsing! Engines at critical." Claire's voice rose above the chaos. "Hold the line. Keep firing what we can." Sweat dripped down her forehead as she worked, refusing to let fear control her. Harris remained silent, his eyes on the tactical screen. He was waiting for the right moment. He knew the Liberty could not endure forever, but he also knew the enemy was nearly finished. He needed one last strike to end it. At last, the opportunity came. Krax's ship shifted, leaving a gap in their defenses. Harris seized the moment. All remaining power to weapons. Target the flagship. Fire everything, the Liberty roared. Rail cannons thundered with their last reserves of energy. Drones sacrificed themselves in suicidal dives, and pulse weapons lashed out in burning waves. The firestorm tore through the alien wall and struck the Dominator, Krax's proud flagship. The ship shook violently, explosions ripping through its decks. Krax screamed in fury, refusing to accept defeat, but the fire consumed him and his command. Jason's console lit up with signals of victory. "Flagship destroyed. Enemy fleet collapsing." The words filled the deck with relief. Claire exhaled sharply, her hand slowing for the first time since the battle began. Harris remained still, his face calm, but his eyes carried the weight of what had just happened. They had done the impossible. They had survived. The battlefield grew quiet as the last alien ships scattered into retreat. Debris floated across the void, silent reminders of the fury that had taken place. The Liberty, though battered and scarred, stood firm. Its crew remained alive, tired but unbroken. Jason leaned back in his chair, his chest heaving with exhaustion. He had never imagined a battle like this, yet he had lived through it. Claire walked across the deck and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did well," she said softly. Jason managed a weak smile, feeling pride instead of fear. Harris looked out into the stars, his mind already thinking ahead. This was only the beginning. The message would spread across the galaxy. A single human warship had stood against a mighty alien fleet and emerged victorious. The balance of power was shifting, and everyone would know it. Humanity was no longer weak. They were a force to be feared. As the Liberty sailed quietly through the wreckage, its crew began to realize the truth. They had not just fought for survival, they had made history, and from this day on, nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same again. The battle had ended, but the silence that followed carried its own kind of weight. The Liberty floated through the wreckage of the alien fleet, its hull battered and scarred but still alive. Fires had been put out across the ship, and damage control teams worked quickly to patch the worst of the wounds. The crew moved with weary steps, their bodies tired but their spirits unbroken. They had survived something no one had believed possible. Yet even in victory there was no room for comfort. The galaxy was watching, and the consequences of this day were only beginning. On the command deck, Captain Daniel Harris stood with his arms folded behind his back. His eyes scanned the stars, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He knew what this meant. Humanity had been underestimated for years, considered weak by the older species who ruled the galaxy. But today that illusion had been shattered. The Liberty had done the impossible, and now every empire would think twice before dismissing humans as fragile. He exhaled slowly, his face calm, though deep inside he felt the heavy weight of what was to come. Lieutenant Claire Morgan stood at her console, her hair pulled back, and her face smudged with the soot of battle. She read through the reports of damage and casualties. Her voice was clear, though a little softer than before. "Hull breaches sealed. Shields offline but repairable. Engineering says we still have propulsion, though at reduced power. Weapons, mostly gone. We can defend ourselves, but only barely." She paused before adding, "We lost 6 crew members." The words hung heavy in the air. Silence filled the deck for a moment, broken only by the soft hum of damaged systems still running. Ensign Jason Carter sat at his station, his body slumped with exhaustion. His hands were scratched, his face pale, but his eyes were alive with something new: confidence. He had survived his first battle, one unlike anything he had ever trained for. His console still displayed the field of wreckage, glowing dots where alien ships had once been. He could hardly believe it. "We won," he whispered to himself, almost afraid to say it too loud. "We actually won." Claire turned to him and gave a small nod. "Yes, we did, but it's not over." She looked toward Harris, who had not moved from his place. He knew she was right. The battle was only the beginning of something greater. Far away, across the galaxy, word of the battle began to spread. Alien commanders who had not taken part in the fight listened to reports in disbelief. Whole fleets destroyed by one human warship? It seemed impossible, yet the evidence was clear. Wreckage drifted across the stars, and survivors from the Coalition's fleet confirmed what had happened. Panic spread among their ranks. The older empires had never imagined humans could rise so quickly. Now they wondered what other surprises humanity had hidden away. But for the Liberty, survival was still uncertain. Damage reports kept coming. The crew worked tirelessly to repair systems, but the warship was fragile in its wounded state. Harris knew that if another fleet found them now, they might not live through a second battle. He ordered the ship to drift quietly, conserving power. The Liberty slid through the wreckage field, pretending to be nothing more than another dead ship among the ruins. Jason watched the stars with wide eyes. His nerves had calmed, but questions now filled his mind. "Captain," he said, his voice hesitant, "do you think they'll come back?" "Another fleet, I mean?" Harris looked at him with steady eyes. "Yes, they'll come back. But next time it won't just be us." Humanity will be ready. His voice carried a weight that made Jason believe him. The young ensign nodded, sitting a little taller at his post. Hours passed. The crew rotated shifts, patched what they could, and prepared for the journey back to safer space. Claire worked alongside the engineers, her sleeves rolled up as she helped reroute power and seal breaches. She was not a commander who stood aside. She worked with her people, and they respected her for it. Jason joined the repair teams when his station was quiet, carrying supplies and learning how to fix systems he had only studied in books. The crew bonded in those hours of quiet struggle. They had fought together, and now they repaired together. That bond was stronger than steel. Meanwhile, across the void, alien survivors struggled to regroup. General Krax was gone, his flagship destroyed in fire, but fragments of his fleet limped away carrying tales of terror. They spoke of drones that struck like ghosts, of weapons that tore through shields, of humans who fought without fear. Some dismissed the survivors as cowards telling lies to excuse their defeat, but others listened closely. The fear in the survivors' voices was too real to ignore. Back on the Liberty, Jason stood at one of the wide observation windows. The stars glimmered outside, peaceful despite the wreckage floating nearby. He pressed his hand against the glass, feeling the cold seep through. "It's strange," he said softly. "All that fighting, all that fire, and out there the stars don't change. They just keep shining." Claire joined him, standing quietly for a moment before answering. "The stars don't change, but we do. And after today, so will the galaxy." Harris approached, his footsteps quiet but firm. "You're both right," he said. "The galaxy won't see us the same way again. They'll fear us now. Some will hate us. Others may try to ally with us. But no one will ignore us." His voice carried the certainty of a man who had seen the truth. Jason looked at him and asked, "Was this always the plan? To show them what we can do?" Harris shook his head slowly. "No, the plan was survival. But survival has a way of changing everything." The hours turned into a day as the Liberty drifted, repairs continuing. Slowly, the ship began to regain strength. Shields flickered back to partial power. Engines grew stronger, though still limited. Weapons remained weak, but enough to hold off a small skirmish. The crew rested in shifts, sleeping in narrow bunks, their dreams filled with fire and stars. Even in sleep, they carried the weight of what they had seen. Jason could not rest. He walked the halls of the Liberty, listening to the hum of the engines and the quiet voices of the crew. He thought about the men and women they had lost. 6 lives gone, and yet they had won. He wondered if victory was worth the cost. But when he saw the determination in the faces of those who remained, he understood. Every life lost had bought survival for the rest, and survival meant hope. He whispered to himself, "We'll make it matter. We have to." In the command room, Harris stood alone. He stared at the tactical display, now filled with silent wreckage. His reflection shimmered faintly in the glass. He thought of Earth, of the colonies, of the families who would soon hear of this battle. They would celebrate the victory, but they would also realize the danger. This was not the end. It was the beginning of something larger than any of them could imagine. Claire returned to the deck, her uniform torn and marked with oil and soot. She carried a datapad filled with repair logs. "We can move again," she reported. "Not far, not fast, but enough to get us out of here." Harris gave a single nod. "Set a course. Quiet and steady. No signals. Let the galaxy wonder if we lived or died." The Liberty turned slowly, leaving the graveyard of ships behind. Its engines glowed faintly, carrying it into the darkness. The crew watched from their stations, tired but hopeful. They did not know what awaited them, but they knew one thing. They had faced the impossible and survived. As they slipped into the silent night of space, Jason sat at his console, his eyes heavy with exhaustion but filled with pride. He thought of his family back on Earth, of the academy instructors who had once told him humanity's greatest weapon was its spirit. He finally understood what they meant. Machines could break, ships could burn, but spirit carried them through. And on this day, the spirit of humanity had changed the galaxy forever. The Liberty moved slowly through the endless stars, carrying the weight of both victory and loss. Its engines hummed softly, still weakened from the battle but strong enough to guide the warship back toward human-controlled space. Inside the ship, the crew worked with quiet determination. They had survived the impossible, yet they knew this was not the end. The battle had changed the galaxy, and with change came uncertainty. Every crew member felt it. like a shadow that followed them wherever they went. Captain Daniel Harris stood on the bridge, his eyes steady as he watched the stars pass by. His face was calm, but the thoughts behind his silence were heavy. He knew that their victory had sent a message across the galaxy. The alien powers who had mocked and underestimated humanity would no longer do so. Fear had replaced arrogance, and fear was a dangerous thing. He folded his hands behind his back and spoke quietly, though his words carried to every ear on the bridge. What we did here will echo far beyond this ship. The galaxy will remember. Lieutenant Claire Morgan stood beside him, her datapad filled with reports. She had hardly rested since the battle, moving from one part of the ship to another, helping wherever she was needed. Her voice was calm as she gave her update. Shields are at half power. Engines stable. Weapons still damaged but functional enough for defense. We can hold our ground if needed, but not for long. Crew morale is high, though exhaustion is clear. She hesitated before finishing. 6 dead. 4 injured, still in the medical bay. They're stable, but recovery will be long. Harris gave a small nod. He did not show his feelings, but Claire knew the weight he carried. Every loss was personal, every name remembered. Yet he also knew they had achieved something greater than survival. They had shown what humans were capable of, and that truth would spread like fire. Ensign Jason Carter sat at his station, his hands moving more confidently than ever before. He no longer trembled at the controls. The battle had changed him. He had seen death, destruction, and the raw strength of humanity. He had felt fear, but he had learned to master it. Now, as he tracked their course and monitored the ship's systems, he felt pride. He had been part of something historic. He glanced at Claire and then at Harris, silently vowing to live up to their trust. Outside, the stars glittered as though nothing had changed. But Jason knew the truth. Everything had changed. The galaxy had witnessed a single human warship destroy a fleet that had once seemed unstoppable. The news spread quickly through whispers, signals, and reports carried by both survivors and spies. Empires far away listened in shock. Some felt fear, others felt anger, and a few began to see humanity in a new light, as potential allies instead of prey. On the alien homeworlds, the aftermath was felt deeply. Leaders argued in their grand chambers, shouting over one another about what had happened. Some called it a lie, an exaggeration spread by humans to appear strong. Others believed it and demanded immediate action. Fear made them reckless. The Vral mourned the loss of their general, Krax, once thought invincible. The Torgans questioned their alliance, wondering if humanity's strength was too dangerous to provoke further. The Lithari, known for their cunning, began to whisper that perhaps it was wiser to negotiate than to fight. The balance of power was shifting, and all because of the Liberty. On the Liberty, life returned slowly to routine. Repairs continued, decks were cleaned, and the dead were honored. A quiet ceremony was held in the observation room. The crew gathered, standing shoulder to shoulder in silence as the names of the fallen were read. Harris spoke with steady words, his voice carrying the respect of a leader who valued every life under his command. They gave everything so that we could stand here today. Their sacrifice is not in vain. We will carry them with us always. Jason felt his chest tighten as he listened, his eyes on the stars beyond the glass. He whispered each name to himself, promising never to forget. Claire stood nearby, her hands clasped in front of her. She did not cry, but her heart ached. She had fought beside these people, worked with them, laughed with them. Their absence was a wound that would never fully heal. Yet she knew this was the reality of war. Sacrifice was the price of survival. After the ceremony, Jason found himself walking the quiet halls of the Liberty. He passed by crew members who nodded at him with respect. He was no longer just the nervous rookie. He had proven himself in battle. That thought filled him with both pride and responsibility. He knew this was only the beginning. He whispered to himself, "I'll be ready. Next time, I'll be ready." Days passed as the Liberty continued its slow journey home. Along the way, the crew repaired more systems. Shields grew stronger, engines steadier. Weapons slowly returned to full power. The warship was healing, just like its crew. And yet the silence of space carried with it an unease. Everyone wondered what would come next. Would the aliens strike back? Would new allies rise from the chaos? No one knew, but all understood one truth. The galaxy would never be the same. On Earth, news of the victory arrived with shock and pride. Families wept for the lost but celebrated the survival of the Liberty. Politicians argued about what it meant for humanity's future. Military leaders prepared for the possibility of retaliation, and ordinary people looked up at the night sky with a new kind of confidence. They knew now that humanity was not weak, not fragile. They had faced the galaxy's judgment and proven themselves strong. When the Liberty finally crossed back into human-controlled space, a fleet of smaller ships met them. Cheers erupted across the comms as the battered warship was welcomed home. Jason sat at his console, listening to the voices of celebration, and felt a warmth spread through him. For the first time, he truly believed that humanity had a place among the stars. Harris stood tall, his eyes forward as always, though a faint hint of pride touched his expression. He spoke quietly, meant only for his crew. This is not the end. This is the beginning. What we have done will shape what comes next. Stand ready. The galaxy will test us again. Claire looked at him, her tired face breaking into a small but genuine smile. And when it does, we'll be ready. The Liberty sailed onward, its scars visible but its spirit unbroken. Around it the stars stretched forever, a reminder of both danger and possibility. The crew knew their journey was far from over. They had made history, and now they would carry its weight into every battle, every challenge, and every uncertain tomorrow. They had been underestimated. They had been attacked, but they had endured, they had fought, and they had won. And from that day on, the galaxy knew the truth. Humanity was not to be ignored, not to be mocked, not to be underestimated. A single warship had changed everything, and the echoes of its victory would last forever.